Three sayings, quotations, hang in the head of college's office at NMCI, one of which reads, "First off, don't let the force of the impression carry you away. Say to it, hold up a bit and let me see what you are and where you are from. Let me put you to the test." It's from a collection of writings called the Discourses by Epictetus, a Stoic who lived around 108 AD. Although it's about 1,900 years old now, that saying has direct and immediate relevance to what we're discussing here today. I'll come back to why in a little bit. These days, the maritime industry, indeed the world at large, is all about automation and digitalization. It's the future. It's doing for the maritime sector as it's done elsewhere, delivering faster, cheaper, and more effective outcomes. It's often safer to let a machine do the job instead of a human. Machines don't get tired. They react faster, more consistently, and with greater accuracy than their biological creators. There's no doubt either in fact nor in my mind that automation and digitalization have and will continue to play a significant and positive role in our world. Who'd argue in the face of miracles like modern supply chains, healthcare, and global communications? In our world of ships, imagine trying to manually design, let alone build or sail the CSCL Globe or the Maersk McKinney Mauler, two of the largest ever human-made moving structures. Inconceivable without technology's help. In coming decades, indeed, we can reasonably expect that the lines between us and automated and digitalized systems will largely disappear. Direct brain-controlled prosthetics are a reality today and are a particularly striking example of where it's all going. Human cyborgs lie in our short-term future. Automation and digitalization, they're here to stay and will become ever more a part of our lives. The claims made for automation and digitalization, faster, lower total cost of ownership, safer, and so on, are generally true. Examples of tasks these systems do demonstrably well fall off the tongue. Keeping a course at sea over long periods, seeing through the fog, optimizing fuel efficiency, or actively stabilizing a vessel in a heavy sea. Frequently, they do them better than human beings. There's positive evidence, too, in that space where humans and technology meet. Back in 2007, a study showed that 75% of people interviewed had admitted to resorting to physical violence against a computer. In the past, most of us spent too much time struggling to get technology to do what we wanted it to do. Lately, however, people don't seem to be struggling as much. Improvements and advances in tech and generational change are gradually consigning the human-machine interface problem to a bad memory, it seems. So it's all good then? Well, not entirely. I'm a bit uneasy, if I'm honest, about where we are with automation and digitalization at sea just now. I'm not suggesting we're in trouble, nor that we should be rolling the clock back or anything, just that perhaps we need to be a bit careful. Let me try and explain two of my key concerns that are very much shaping my views on future education and training, and where we should be concentrating our efforts for the foreseeable. To do that, I have to take a few minutes to talk about stories. Yes, stories. About 70,000 years ago, something called the cognitive revolution occurred. It was a change in human brains and behavior where we developed the ability to think and communicate in abstract terms, to share concepts and ideas with one another about stuff that we can't touch or feel because it's not physically real. Things like economics, or a nation state, or a corporation. Things described by the historian Yuval Harari in his book Sapiens as common myths that exist only in people's collective imaginations. These shared myths, these stories, broke down the barriers that up to then had limited how many humans could work together, and enabled cooperation that today goes on between hundreds of millions of us all over the world. Stories also allowed us to do something else incredibly powerful. to wonder and imagine new futures together. Telling each other stories led to mathematics, to engineering, and to science. Maths led to Boolean logic, the foundational maths for computers, that of course underpins the entire phenomenon of automation and digitalization. Without stories, we'd never have developed technology. Being able to tell stories, however, is only one side of the coin. For the cognitive revolution trick to work, we must also be disposed to be accepting and embracing stories that we're told. Evolution has, over the intervening 70,000 years, wired up our brains in such a way that we're open to believing stories. That, of course, can be a weakness. It leaves us open to influence and even to convincing ourselves on occasion that things are other than in fact they are. I might mention in passing at this point that one type of storytelling human beings engage in is called sales and marketing. Because of our receptiveness to stories and to even deceiving ourselves sometimes, when we're dealing with activities as important as operating ships at sea, we need to be careful. We should heed the wise counsel of Epictetus. Remember him, the 1900-year-old Stoic? And not allow ourselves to be carried away by the force of the impression, but rather hold it up, have a closer look at it, and put our impressions about what's going on to the test. So I did. When I did this for the claims made for automation and digitalization at sea, some of the detail omitted and the nuances lost in storytelling turned out to be rather important. All the examples I mentioned a while ago, steering and stabilizing ships and so on, are repetitive tasks carried out over extended periods. They are also ones that critically have limited potential outcomes under normal operating conditions. They are also the kinds of activities that bore the socks off intelligent 21st century human beings. They're the kind of stuff humans are really bad at. Why? Our brains have evolved to wander by default, to dream, not to concentrate on some endless, ever-repeating chore. It's hardly a surprise that unthinking machines will do better than us in these situations, and we should let them at such jobs, as long as that's all those jobs actually involve. Our brains are machines that have evolved to quickly solve big, messy, open-ended problems, to work through enormously complex webs of often conflicting information, and to find workable ways through to solutions. If we come at automation and digitalization from the perspective of tasks that can end up in these messy and uncertain circumstances, where there's no single simple on-off answer anymore, then the effectiveness of these systems starts to come into question. Any situation that could end up involving what we classify as decision-making and problem-solving falls into this category, and that's pretty much any situation that arises at sea, particularly when things go wrong or something unexpected occurs. In that context, the automation and digitalization emperor begins to look, well, rather lacking in clothing. Automation and digitalization systems, indeed technology in general, is still really bad in the decision-making and problem-solving situations. You might wish to take a look at the Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers, IEEE, their series called Why Software Fails, or their Risk Factor blog. They've also got an interesting 10-year review with the rather deflating title, The Staggering Impact of IT Systems Gone Wrong. There's also, by the way, a good lecture video online called What Happens When Maths Goes Wrong. That's well worth a look. I needn't remind you that maths, implemented by human beings, of course, underpins every computer system and software program. Why we seem to have a blind spot to this shortcoming in today's automation and digitalization systems has, of course, to do with our susceptibility to being drawn in by a good story. We live in a dream age for anyone whose job it is to sell computers or computer systems. We hear every day about supposedly great leaps forward in artificial intelligence. We're talking to machines and they're talking back and even making sense. This is the second stage of Marvel and DC Comics, the revival of epic technological sagas of physics-defying technology and sentient artificial intelligence. This constant bombardment of tech is capable has many of us now believing that the computing machines we're actually using every day are more intelligent and capable than in fact they are. To quote Claire from earlier, pah. When data gets corrupted or conflicted, for example, because of a bad sensor, or when an algorithm or a whole system goes into an infinite loop because certain situations weren't foreseen by their human designers, or the prototype systems weren't adequately tested, automation and digitalization systems become at least useless, at worst, deadly. We still have a way to go to building truly robust self-monitoring and self-correcting systems. Such systems will come, of that I'm sure. But the critical point for us here today is we're not there yet. Our belief in the abilities of today's technology to adapt and respond to anything even slightly outside their design or programming, assuming of course that those things have been done right in the first place, is somewhat at variance with the facts, and perhaps we need to recalibrate a bit. Now, the solutions that humans find to these big messy problems, they aren't always pretty, they're often suboptimal in many ways, and yes, sometimes the solutions we come up with don't work out. The thing is, though, most of the time they do. Now, you might be forgiven for thinking otherwise, but that's only because human beings seem to relish coming down really hard on others when things occasionally don't work out. The evidence is clear, however. The human brain is, in fact, incredibly good at finding workable solutions to horribly messy problems, and we shouldn't lose sight of that in our technological awe. This is a classic instance of something quite special being taken for granted simply because it works. The reason we don't read about collisions happening every single day in busy ports and coastal waterways all over the world is because human brains are successfully coming up with solutions to stop them from happening hundreds upon hundreds of times every day. If there's a significant chance of a big, messy, complex, contradictory problem in the offing, pretty much an everyday occurrence at sea, I'd suggest, for what it's worth, my view is you continue to want a human in the loop and with the ability to effectively intervene. It may be different in 10 or 20 years, but for now, we should be keeping the human brain front and center. The second concern I have is about the seeming improvement in relations between people and computing machines. Yes, part of the explanation for that new apparent entente cordiale is down to improvements in user interfaces and interaction technology and generational change. However, they don't fully explain the suddenness nor steepness of the fall-off in people shouting at computers. There's something else at play. I'm concerned that what may be going on is that more and more of us may be increasingly and unconsciously giving up. And in so doing, are unintentionally surrendering critical thinking and decision-making territory to machines. That's the stuff machines are really quite terrible at, as I and others today have repeatedly pointed out. So why are we doing this? I think it may be down to the simple fact that we're finally becoming overwhelmed by the amount of data and information being dumped on us from everywhere, all of the time. The information overload nightmare is now becoming real. Secondly, because of the incessant volume, we're just being beaten down now by the sheer effort of trying to continue to critically analyse, to fact-check and error-check it all. And so, instead of continuing to do as our Stoic friend Epictetus advises us and critically question what machines are telling us, more and more of us are just throwing in the towel and accepting what's on the screen. Because we're just not questioning it anymore, by default, machine output is becoming truth, regardless of its accuracy. The younger generations coming through also have an additional challenge. They aren't actually being taught in school much, if at all anymore, the necessary skills how to critically analyse, either numerically or logically, or how to be able to recognise bad or contradictory data. Many simply don't even realise there's a problem here. If it's on a screen, then it's true. For someone who has spent almost 30 years working closely with computing machines and those who program them, I'm terrified by this. Computer systems are perfectly capable of producing total rubbish, deciding it's entirely correct and consistent, and then proceeding to do mad, bad, or downright dangerous things on the back of it. Humans here are our last line of defense. They need to be able to keep critically assessing computer system outputs, and they need to know how to do so. An observation about the whole matter of taking humans out of the loop. I've wondered about that, and I have a question, influenced, I'll admit, by my time involved in software development, poacher turned gamekeeper, if you will. Is it not the case that we're not, in fact, taking humans out of the loop at all when we deploy a computer system, say, at sea, but we're simply replacing one set of humans over which, by the way, we have influence and control, the ship's crew, with another group of humans which we've no influence nor control over at all, the designers, coders, and testers of the system we're deploying. If I continue to pull on that thread, I find myself thinking that these designers and developers are human, just like us, and so, like the rest of us, can also be sucked into the illusion that their systems are more capable than they are. Designers and coders especially often become irrationally proud of their engineering creations, blinding them to their shortcomings. Sometimes even to the extent that they come to believe humans should be actively excluded from interfering in the tasks the computer system exists to manage. It sounds like something from a bad sci-fi movie, doesn't it? I'm not making this up, however. I've had arguments with software engineers writing mission-critical systems about just that specific issue, and more than once. What does the relentless onward march of automation and digitalization mean for maritime education and training? It's a two-part question. The first is what the increased use of such systems at sea means for what we teach and train ashore, and the second is about the role of automation and digitalization in the delivery of education and training itself. I won't say anything about the latter, that's an entire talk in its own right. But on the former, what we're focused on includes, we're stepping up efforts to make cadets much more aware of their own technology blind spots and about the kinds of issues I've talked about here. We're looking at how to give cadets much improved critical, logical, and numerical analysis skills so they can properly oversee automation and digitalization systems. We're changing training emphasis. I had kids put in here, I've crossed it out and put in young adults instead. Political correctness is a terrible thing. Young adults coming through these days have phenomenal abilities to find their way around a computer system. Give them an Ectus and half an hour later they can drive it like they've been at it for years. Consequently, we're looking at less time and emphasis on showing the knobology, if you will, and more time on principles and other skills like sanity checking data. We're having a lot of conversations about the challenge of how to keep watchkeepers engaged and fully situationally aware, when in the normal course of operations, the automation and digitalization systems are doing the work. This piece is huge in terms of ensuring that humans can immediately and effectively step in when the need arises. It's not an easy one to address, given humans bore easily for the reasons I mentioned earlier. There are also softer issues. It's hard to deny that there's an element of humans being replaced with machines going on, and we're seeing signs that it's undermining people's work satisfaction and pride in their profession. We're constantly trying to recast the conversation so it's not about dilution or dumbing down of the profession, but instead a change in focus. You're still as much a professional, just doing different to before. I could go on, but my time is up. To end next to where I started, with the second of those sayings that hang on the wall of my office. This one by Rudyard Kipling is, I'm sure, familiar to at least some of you. Though written back in 1935, it continues to this day to serve as a reminder to those of us who dabble with ships, the sea, and technology. This new ship here is fitted according to the reported increase of knowledge among mankind. Namely, she is cumbered end to end with bells and trumpets and clocks and wires which, it has been told to me, can call voices out of the air or the waters to con the ship while her crew sleep. But sleep thou lightly. it has not yet been told to me that the sea has ceased to be the sea. Thank you.